Hi, friends, and welcome to another episode of Lionsgate Podcast with Sahdi and Omni. I'm Omni.
And I'm Sahdi.
And today's episode is our true crime episode, which is every episode 3 of every season.
And tonight we're going to be talking all about Zack and Addie. They're a couple who captured the spirit of New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. And they were more than just bartenders. They were the heart of the French Quarters and nightlife. They were known for their wild love and their crazy lifestyle, and their refusal to leave the city during its darkest hours. Zack and Addie became a symbol of resilience. But there was also a side to their story that no one could see. A love that burned too hot and fast and spiraled out of control, and a tragic end that left New Orleans reeling. In this episode, we'll uncover who Zack and Addie were, their highs, their lows, and the details of a murder-suicide that left a permanent scar on the city that they loved. What really happened behind closed doors, and what does their story tell us about love, loss, and the human condition in the face of disaster? So to understand the ending, we have to go all the way back to the beginning, before the storm, before the chaos, when Zack and Addie were just two souls searching for meaning in a city that promised everything but delivered heartbreak in the end. And at the end of this episode, we are attempting to channel the energy of Zack and Addie. And we've decided to try to do them separately because of the tragic way that their relationship ended, which was a murder-suicide.
And Addie has already tried to come through with you today, right?
Yeah, I can let you guys know a little bit about that before we get started. I was finishing up with my research on her, and as I closed my book, I heard a voice, and I felt like it was Addie. It was in a country accent, and she said, "Hey." And I knew that I was going to be coming here tonight to the studio and recording and channeling their energy. So I politely blocked her energy, and I got a really bad headache at the same time. A headache came on. I got up and looked in the mirror in the bathroom, and a blood vessel broke inside of my eye. And I wasn't rubbing my eye, wasn't coughing or anything like that. So I'm not sure where this night is going to go. I would like for it to be as authentic as possible. So you guys are on this journey with me.
Absolutely. Yeah, she got a hold of me immediately because usually I pick up on her energy, but I was in the middle of a computer glitch of posting some episodes. So I was hyper focused elsewhere, and she was like, "How are you feeling?" I'm like, "I'm feeling fine. Why? What's up?" Because usually I channel her energy even when I'm not expecting it. She's like, "I have a headache." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm feeling fine." And then she told me what happened. And when she came over, like, an hour later, I could still see the blood vessel sticking out of her eye, but she said it looked way better.
Oh, yeah. When I first looked at it, it was something out of a scary movie. I was like, oh my God, it like completely took over my eye and was going into the color of my eye. And I was like, damn, that never happens to me either. I don't think I've ever broken a blood vessel in my eye before.
Yeah. I was like, why don't you start by doing a protection ritual at home?
Yeah.
And then we went ahead and did our protection ritual here, and we shared it on Witchy Wednesday. So it is posted to our social medias if you want to check that out. If you're not sure how a protection ritual should go, or you just want to see one firsthand, we go over and share that for the first time ever. So that was exciting, actually, to share our energy and our ritual and our practice with you guys.
Yeah, let us know if you like that, because we do Witchy Wednesday, and usually we were doing free tarot readings live. And now we're considering branching out from that and doing live spells on Witchy Wednesday.
We'll be doing both, but rotating throughout. Tarot is a part of witchcraft, and we want to share it all. All right, so let's get started at this story. We're going to start with Zack. So Zack was born May 15th, 1978 in California. His dad was from California. His mom was from Washington, which is weird because we're from Oregon. We have a lot of synchronicities to this case, so we'll be talking about that as well. His dad and mom divorced, though, when he was young, and so he ended up ping-ponging between the states, especially when he started to become a teenager and had a lot of anger issues. His mom kind of just had him go with his dad more in California. And then his dad really embraced the nomad lifestyle, so his dad would end up traveling with him, and they traveled when he was, 17?
Yeah, he was 17, and they were going to take a journey across the United States.
And then they ended up in New Orleans, and Zack was like, all right, Dad, I'm staying.
Yeah, he fell in love with New Orleans. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And then his dad was like, all right, well, have fun.
I know. And I was talking to Sahdi earlier and I was like, I would never let my kid, I don't care if they're 17. She's like, you got to think about it though. It was in 1995 and things were different there. And then I started thinking back and I was like, yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, I was looking at the dates and he's only a few years younger than me. And in 95, I already had 2 kids. Yeah. And I had been living on my own since I was 16, had my own apartment, 2 jobs. That was more accepted back then. Kids grew up really fast.
Yeah, he did a lot of magic tricks. He was very good looking, very charismatic, very charming. He ended up bartending and doing magic tricks for customers. He was the life of the party for sure. Just the cool rock and roll kid. And then he met Lana. He was a bartender at that point and Lana was a stripper. So she ended up in his bar and that's how they met and they immediately fell in love.
Yeah, when Lana first met him, she instantly, it was almost love at first sight for her. They quickly started a sexual relationship and fell in love. And she got pregnant very quickly. And then she found out that he was a minor.
Yeah.
So I'll let you hear it from her. We have a little voice clip from Lana.
He was gregarious and funny and happy-go-lucky and easygoing and fun. The relationship developed very quickly. We quickly had feelings for each other. I suddenly found myself pregnant. I found out he was 17. I was 27 at the time. So I broke up with him. I was going to have the child. He could be in the child's life or he didn't have to. But I wasn't going to chase him down for anything because I felt that I couldn't force a child upon him that he possibly was not ready for. But he wanted us to be a family. And he asked me to marry him.
So yeah, that was just a little clip and it shows you, even at 17 years old, he was able to pull a 27-year-old stripper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he presented himself a lot older than he was. So he
He
definitely
was mature for his age.
But yeah, so they ended up having a kid and he was all about family life and being a good dad and all of it. But the problem is that Lana was still stripping and he was still working a lot of bartending shifts and he wanted to have a stable life for his family. He didn't want Lana to strip anymore, especially when she ended up pregnant with her second kid. So Zack ended up enlisting into the Army in the year 2000 so that he could provide health insurance and a steady paycheck to help take care of his family. And he originally enlisted for 8 years, which I thought was kind of wild because anybody I know personally that have enlisted, they start out with 2 years or 4 years, but he enlisted for 8. He wanted to make sure his family was taken care of, which is very commendable. It was before the Iraqi war, so he didn't fully know what he was getting into. When he was in Kosovo and Iraq, he was a military policeman. And he befriended a little Iraqi girl. And because she was associating with American soldiers, the insurgents murdered her. And that really messed with his head in the sense that he had a little girl at home. So he really connected with her. And then the Iraqi war started. So during the Iraqi war, he actually ended up befriending a little Iraqi boy. And the little boy's family owned a convenience store. So he would bring him sodas and stuff. And he had a little boy at home. So he was very connected. And the insurgents blew up the entire shop with the entire family in it. So that was just like another trauma layered on top of him being away from his 2 kids. These 2 kids that reminded him of his kids at home both got murdered because of this war. And that started in 2003, March 20th. And when that happened, he got stationed in Iraq. And he was a military policeman there to enforce martial law, basically. And for those of you that remember, a lot of the insurgents did not like the Americans being there. And so it was a very volatile situation to be put in the first place. And throughout his military career, he had hoof foot. And that's a very painful thing that you can't really get rid of without rest. But because he was in the military, he couldn't really rest. All they could do is reassign him. And instead of going and being a policeman to enforce martial law, they reassigned him to a non-combat role at Camp Victory in Baghdad, Iraq. And that really upset him because him and his platoon were super close. He had 2 male buddies, one of them in which synchronistically grew up the town over from where I grew up, which I thought was really wild. And the other one was a female. And she ended up being the first female casualty of the Iraqi war. He was stationed at the Camp Victory doing administrative and logistical support because he couldn't physically walk. there was a big car explosion and she died, and his other 2 platoon buddies ended up losing a leg and getting shipped back home. At that point, that really hit him hard. At the same time, Lana had hepatitis C, and she was very sick, and she was struggling to even take care of the 2 kids at that point because her health was so bad, and the doctor was worried she wasn't going to make it. And so they were reapplying to let him have some leave to go home. And his higher ups were like, no. I mean, he was doing good work. I'm not trying to discredit that, but he wasn't even able to do the work he wanted to do there and make the difference where he wanted to. And then his wife is possibly back home at the military base, dying, not able to take care of the kids because they had moved away from New Orleans at that point. And he became very resentful. And then when he lost his platoon, the people that he was closest to, he was like, I'm not doing this anymore. So he purposely failed his conditioning tests. They make sure that they can physically go forward. And it's like a simple test with like sit-ups and push-ups and whatnot. And he not only failed it, but he failed it so below where they were like,
Yeah, they knew he was failing on purpose.
Yeah, they made him do extra training and all that, and he still failed. And it took him like 3 months, and he ended up getting discharged. And his discharge that he got was general under honorable conditions, which means that he lost his health benefits when he left the Army. He ended up going back to New Orleans, and Lana was furious with him. She was furious because you might as well left when I was dying, but also he didn't communicate that he was being discharged. He didn't communicate how he was discharged or that he lost his benefits until he ended up back in New Orleans. And he basically had to go back to bartending, and they had to go back to struggling. And she's like, what did I go through the hell that I went through? And you too, for nothing at this point.
Right. To be exactly where we were before you left.
Exactly. Yeah.
So she broke up with him.
Mm-hmm.
So he gets back in 2005. Within 6 months of him getting back home, he found a job in the French Quarter, bartending.
Of course.
Back to his old magic tricks and his pre-soldier personality.
Mm-hmm.
That's when he met Addie. Let me tell you a little bit about Addie. So Addie was born January 15th, 1976. So she was a few years older than him. We have a recording of a friend of hers. It was her best friend, and his name is Cappy. And this is what he has to say about Addie.
Addie was
kind and creative and funny and engaging. She was extraordinarily intelligent and literate. She was also a seamstress, costume maker. She had won awards as a dance instructor.
Yes, that was her best friend explaining how he viewed her. Zack and Addie worked separate shifts. She came in right after he did. And he instantly, it was almost like love at first sight. He was instantly attracted to her, but she did not really like him at first at all.
Yeah.
She kind of looked at him because he did magic tricks and he was in the military, and she was not attracted to military men at all.
No.
She was a little free spirit, and it just wasn't her vibe. The more he tried to impress her, the more she would roll her eyes at him and just think that he was cheesy and corny. It more repelled her than anything at first, because he had, what do the kids call it nowadays? The pick-me energy.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was like, look at me, look what I can do. Look at this magic trick. Look at this. And she was just like, you are definitely not my type.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how it was for a while. And he just kept repeatedly trying to win her over.
She was still friends with one of her exes, and when she dated him, he was like, so, Addie would have one of her episodes, and I truly believe, and this is just my opinion, that she had undiagnosed bipolar disorder, because her friends would talk about in interviews how she would have one of her episodes and she would be totally fine, and then the next moment she'd fly off the handle. Really hard for her to regulate her emotions. And I think that was an underlying issue. And then she self-medicated with drugs and alcohol. When I first started researching this, I went through some TikToks and some videos, and I looked through the comments of people that were locals in New Orleans, because that's where we originally heard of the story and that's where they're from and this takes place. And somebody had mentioned to read the book Shake Off the Devil. I read that. It was published by an investigative reporter named Ethan Brown, and he went really in depth with a lot of things, and he interviewed a lot of people firsthand. He talked about Addie's friend and how the friend said, yeah, well, she was somebody who had a lot of physical and sexual abuse in her younger years. So when she was in a relationship, she tended to make that man an abuser. It's kind of a messed up way to put it, but I think what he was saying is like she almost is expecting the abuse in a way.
Well, yeah, when I was researching Addie, I knew that she was from North Carolina. She was a dance instructor there, and that's pretty much as far as it went.
Yeah.
There was rumors that she was sexually abused as a child, and she had a lot of outbursts, and she made some enemies in North Carolina. And she had a drinking problem then, and she dabbled in drugs. So when she left North Carolina, she left to kind of have a clean slate and get away from the people that everybody knew, everybody in the small town that she was in.
Yeah.
And so she just wanted to get away from that. The little bit that I did find, you're absolutely right. They said that she had been sexually assaulted as a child and was never healed from that.
Yeah.
She never went to counseling or anything like that. She just jumped states and started a new life somewhere else.
And when she would drink, the trauma of that would come out.
Yeah, a lot of people said that she had 2 different personalities. Like, for the longest time, she just kind of blew him off and she didn't really like him. And then when I guess she stayed after and they ended up having shots together and one thing led to another. And then that was all she wrote. They were inseparable after that.
Yeah. Her friend Caps in one of the interviews was talking about how she had this big grin on her face.
Yeah, she hadn't seen her in a few weeks. And the last time we saw her, she was like not interested in him at all. And then he came back in and she was just like ear to ear grinning.
Yeah.
And he could tell that they were like in love with each other. And this is like a week before Hurricane Katrina.
Yeah. And Zack conveniently leaves things out, didn't tell Addie that he even had kids or a wife because he was still technically married at that point, even though they were separated.
He finally ended up telling her that he had 2 kids and a wife, and she was fucking pissed. Because she was like, as long as we've known each other, you didn't think this was something important that you needed to tell me. And at that point, they had been casual drug users, but they drank pretty much every day. When she found out about the wife and kids, she was mad, but she also accepted it. So she found out about the kids and the wife. She accepted it. And he was living with her at the time in her apartment because right after that one night of them having sex, they were pretty much inseparable.
Good dick.
Right. And so within a week, Hurricane Katrina was on its way. He decided that he was going to stay with Addie instead of going to his wife and kids. And they lived in New Orleans too. And so his wife was pissed. She was like, how can you not be thinking about your children? I'm over here by myself, a single mom with 2 of your kids. And you're telling me that you're not going to come home and protect your children?
Yeah.
I mean, the hurricane's coming. I'm afraid. This looks dangerous. This looks scary. And she had no way to evacuate at that point. She had to just ride the storm out.
Yeah, she didn't have a car.
Money. And she didn't have any way to go out. She's like single mom with 2 kids. He was just like, I'm sorry. I've already told Addie that I'm going to stay with her and that's what I'm going to do. And they hung up like that. And he just left it.
And Hurricane Katrina hit August 29th of 2005. So that's the timeline of all of this happening pretty quickly.
When the storm came through, this was a storm of a lifetime hitting Louisiana. They had over 150 mile an hour winds. 80% of New Orleans was underwater after Katrina hit. The levees broke and 1,800 people died. But where they were in the French Quarter, they didn't feel the impact. I mean, they heard the hurricane coming and they were really scared when it was happening because if you lost a roof, you were dead.
Yeah.
Like you were going out with that roof and a lot of people died that way.
Yeah, when we were in New Orleans, one of our Lyft drivers was talking about she was 7 when Hurricane Katrina hit and her dad had to go raid a house and flip a fridge upside down so her and her little 8-month-old baby brother and mom could float. I didn't even know fridges float.
Yeah.
And it was her and 3 families in the same area. And her family got evacuated from the helicopter because they had a baby.
Yeah.
The other 2 were left. I could never imagine.
And you just had to do what you had to do. There were so many animals abandoned because, I mean, it's your life or theirs.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was just a lot of devastation, a lot of grief, a lot of loss in that energy. Not for Zack and Addie. When they came out of that, their love affair, and then the power went out. And they were safe where they were.
Yeah.
And so they immediately pretty much became socialites of the community. They were throwing parties on rooftops. They were also helping people too. They were going through, they were making sure that everybody was okay. But they had a lot of drug connections and they pretty much knew everybody. So they kind of became famous through the aftermath of the storm.
Yeah, and news stations were interviewing them, and they were on the news grilling on rooftops and feeding the community. And they were also helping with cleanup and stuff. So they became kind of famous.
They were on the cover of New York Times.
Yeah. And Lana didn't even know he was alive.
Oh my God. I feel so bad for Lana because, yeah, they just went off grid. They were having the time of their life. And she didn't hear from him for a month. I actually have a video clip from Lana.
It was so dead quiet everywhere. You could hear like random screams or random gunshot. It was like the apocalypse or something. My phone calls were going unanswered and I couldn't get in touch with him. I was terrified that my children had lost their father.
So a few weeks after Katrina, news crews came by and he asked to borrow their phone. He called his mom and he told his mom that he was okay. They were all freaking out. They were so happy for him. But poor Lana, he still didn't contact her for another 2 weeks.
And she had his children.
Yeah. I guess she was on the Red Cross and she found his picture of him with a beer and a cigarette in his hand, living it up.
Oh, I'd be so angry.
And that's how she found out that he didn't die. And I'm not sure why the mom didn't communicate that with her.
I couldn't imagine having to sit there and think about what to tell your kids about their father, especially when he had ways to communicate and he just chose not to.
He just chose not to. He was having too much fun. But from what everybody's saying and all the research that I did, that's when their drug abuse was daily because they didn't have a job. They didn't have any bills. They were the center of attention. Everybody wanted to be around them and they just stayed high. They just did coke and drank every single day. He wasn't thinking about his kids.
No.
I had to really think about that because not only did they think he might be dead, did he not question if they survived Katrina? You know, he didn't care.
Or maybe that's how he justified detaching, is maybe in his head he was like, yeah, they didn't make it.
Yeah. So they were just having the time of their lives, right? And they were connecting, they were falling in love more and more every single day and everything was great. And then when the lights came back on, that's when reality hit them.
Yep.
Because now they had to go back to work. Now they had to pay bills. Now they had to come back to reality. That's when he actually called Lana, his wife, and he apologized to her for not contacting. And she was freaking out on him. She's like, you motherfucker.
Yeah, I know.
How could you do this to me and your kids and all this other stuff? And so they had made an appointment to meet up at a bar for a few drinks and talk about the kids and talk about everything that happened. He did that. He didn't bring Addie with him. They had a discussion, and that's when she was like, look, these are your kids too. I'm not doing this by myself. She's like, you're going to get the kids every other weekend. Yeah. And that's how it's going to be because this is bullshit.
Yeah.
She has every right to do that too. So he came back and he told Addie about it. And at first, Addie was like, oh, okay, that's cool. You're going to get your kids or whatever. She even went out and bought the kids some outfits and some stuff like that. But then when it came down to actually having the kids over,
She pouted.
she changed her mind. And she was like, never mind. If you have your kids, you need to go to a hotel.
Yeah, she flipped a switch the first time she was supposed to meet them. She ended up pouting and shut herself in the room and refused to meet them, which made me, I was like, that sounds more like a mental illness.
Well, it also sounds like drug use.
That too, yeah.
Because sometimes if you've been doing drugs for a couple days and one day you might think, oh, that sounds like a really good idea. I want to meet your kids. But if you've been using for a few days and you're coming down, you don't really want to be around anybody, especially meeting kids for the first time. So there's kind of a gray area there with that. It could have been mental illness or it could have been her just coming down from drugs and
Or
not wanting-
both.
Yeah, exactly. That turned into a thing.
Yeah.
That she didn't want to be around the kids. And when it was his weekend, he needed to take the kids to a hotel room.
Which is wild.
Right. So after the lights came back on and reality started to come back, they were fighting a lot from what people said. They were breaking up. She was kicking him out of the house all the time. They would get into huge fights, like in front of everybody. So they had all these friends and all this spotlight on them for so long. And then they started losing friends. Nobody wanted to hang out with them anymore because every time they'd hang out, they'd end up getting into a huge fight.
Yeah, it was toxic and volatile. And Addie would get mad and pull guns out on people. And according to some interviews, she was wild and she had a gun and she would try to fight people and she'd flip that switch and just be out of control. Nobody feels safe to be around that.
And then with him, he added fuel to that because he was super jealous. He got a job after the storm at a grocery store and he was making really good tips. And then she got a job at a bar. And from what people were saying, that's just when the fire was out of control. He
Yeah.
would go into her bar and he would grab her by her arm, and he would think other customers were like flirting with her and confront other customers. And her boss would be like, hey, this is how she makes her money, dude. Like,
Yeah.
we like you and we know that she loves you, but you need to stop.
You need to back off.
Yeah, I guess it was just all the time. From what friends and people were saying is that it seemed like every other day there was a huge fight. It got really bad, and then one night they got into a huge fight, and I guess they were both hitting each other, and he ended up actually hitting her. Like,
Yeah.
before then, he'd only grabbed her. He'd never hit her before. He'd held on to her. But this particular night, he actually hit her for the very first time. And she fell asleep, and when she woke up, he was gone.
Yeah.
In the middle of the night, he got a train ticket to Washington, and he left.
Yeah, and then she went to work the next day with a black eye or bruises on her face. And when people would be like, what happened? She'd be like, oh, Zack hit me. One of her friends was a man that was homosexual. And he had an interview where he was like, yeah, she would get drunk and then would call him a slur. And he's like, that's something I could say about myself. But the way she said it, it was a slur for one. And for two, it was very hateful. And he goes, I stopped talking to her for 3 whole months after that.
Yeah, I heard that in a couple other articles too, where she was homophobic. And some of the other things that I've heard, and this is all hearsay, right? This is all word of mouth from other people, that she also had a tendency to be racist at
Right.
times. Zack was bisexual. And he had let Addie know that. And he never cheated on her with a man at this point. From what people knew up until that first time that he hit her, that even though he let her know that he was bisexual, he had never stepped out on her with another man. Right. But it did cause a lot of arguments and stuff like that.
Because her ex had cheated on her with a man.
Right,
too.
exactly. So she already had that in her mind. Like, I have trauma with that. In her mind, she was probably like, oh, now I don't have to worry about just women. Now I have to worry about women and men. And she had a lot of trauma that she was unhealed from, obviously.
Yeah.
He left and went to Washington. And she woke up the next day and she was like, fuck, he really left.
Yeah.
She couldn't even believe it. Like, she didn't really think he was going to leave her. And for the first couple of days, she kind of played the victim role. Not that she wasn't a victim, because
Yeah.
no man should ever hit a woman. But she was playing that card pretty heavy and just going around and telling everybody, he hit me, you know?
Yeah.
Pretty much anybody that would listen. And then a few days later, she started missing him
Yeah.
and wanting him to come home. And he had told everybody, all of his friends, he's like, I'm done with her. I hit her. I fucked up. That's not my nature to do shit like that. He's like, I'm out of here. Like, I'm done with her. Same with her. In a couple days, he was like, I miss her. I love her. I think I made a mistake by leaving. You know, I'll never do anything like that again.
Meanwhile, he was back in Washington telling his family that he was staying there. His brother was trying to get him to re-enlist into the army at that point.
Yep, exactly. But within like 2 weeks, he was back home.
Yeah, because Addie's friend ended up buying him a ticket home. But
Cappy.
Yeah,
it was
Cappy.
the same guy that was her best friend. And he felt bad because he would come over to console her. He was like, this was obviously love.
Yeah.
They got too drunk. They got too fucked up. And in his mind, he's rationalizing it, right?
Yeah.
He's like, it's not right that he hit her, but she can get violent too sometimes. I've seen her go crazy.
Yeah.
So he wasn't taking sides with either one. He was just saying, how do I get them back together? Because she was crying every day. She was beside herself. She missed him. And it was like, it really felt like a karmic relationship.
Oh, for
on
sure.
fire, right?
Yeah.
He buys the ticket and he gets him back home. 2 days later, they were already fighting again.
Yeah. Some of the times that she kicked him out, he was homeless.
Yeah, he had to sleep on the street,
Yeah.
couch surf, go to different people's houses. And the more that they fought, the more that they would use drugs together.
Mm-hmm.
It would just cycle that same pattern over and over again with them. And it just kept getting worse and worse. And they kept losing more and more friends and nobody wanted to be around them. And they were just like, I can't. You guys are not fun anymore. You're not the people that we used to know.
Yeah. Well, they did have a friend that they lent money to at one point because he was in a tough spot, and they lent him like $900. And he said in return, because he was a drug dealer, he's like, you guys can come get a small bag of Coke from me every once in a while, which is what they did for about a year. And then after Katrina, they were getting like $400 every trip they went to his house. And at one point he looked at him and was like, hey, you guys, I've paid my debt for you, and I can't keep giving you this. And Addie went off on him and was like, what do we have to do? Punch you in the head? Basically told him like, I will fuck you up. And Squirrel was like, oh, okay, never mind. And ended up giving him Coke. And I guess Zack came back and apologized to him for it. But even that friend that had given them so much was like at his limit with them.
Yeah, everybody was.
But it was at this point that everybody that knew Zack talked about his PTSD really setting in with his episodes of outbursts that they had never seen before with the drug use and his depressive episodes and whatnot really showing to everybody. And Addie had said to one of her friends, like, Zack has a whole nother persona that you don't even know about. He was like, I never saw that until Katrina happened, and then everyone started seeing this other side of him. Seemed like a darker side, but it was mostly contributed to his PTSD from the war. Like, he just came back with like this dark passenger.
That's when he was just kind of like on the fence with her, because he would go back to her. They were in love with each other. She would beg for him to come back. He would, and then she'd kick him back out again. So that's when he started cheating on her. He started cheating on her with strippers, and he started kind of doing his own thing. And then when he would get back, the arguments would get even worse, because she would know that he was with another girl while they were split up or on break. And so this is what Lana had to say about their relationship towards the end, his wife.
Addie were breaking up all the time. Wasn't just argument, it was saying horrible things to each other and doing nasty stuff to each other.
Then he ended up in a full-blown relationship on the side, unbeknownst to Addie, with a man. And his friend Squirrel, they were drinking one time. It came up and Zack had said, well, you know, I'm kind of a homosexual. And Squirrel's like, what do you mean kind of? And he just kind of came out to him. But he was cheating. He was stepping out on Addie's. And she had that trauma on top of trauma to do with this specifically. So this definitely was going to trigger her.
So this is what led up to the murder-suicide. Addie found out that he was with a guy and cheated on her. And she, I'm not going to say that she was petty, but she was. She was like, oh, okay, I'm going to get him back.
Yeah.
She had gotten into an argument with her current landlord, and she ended up moving out and moving in upstairs over a voodoo temple. And she didn't have a lot of money. So she was like, this is what I'm going to do. Because he was making good money at the time. He was working at the grocery store. He's making good tips.
Yeah, he's working 7 days a week.
Yeah, he was working all the time. He had money. She told him that she wanted him to move in with her to the new place. So he paid the first and last month's deposit. He did all the heavy lifting. He moved everything from her old place into her new place.
Which at the time after Hurricane Katrina was unheard of.
Right, exactly.
Having first and last month's rent. So that apartment was vacant for a day before they moved in.
Right. Anyway, she basically tricked him. She lied to him and she acted like everything was okay. And she was like, yeah, I love you, whatever. Come on, let's move in together. Right. And after he got everything moved in and paid for everything, she went down and only put her name on the lease and then immediately kicked him out after that.
Yeah.
And he was like, what the fuck do you mean? You're kicking me out. I just put all this money in. She's like, well, your name's not on the lease, so you need to get out.
Yeah.
So it turned into this big, huge thing. He called down to the landlord and he's like cussing them out. And he's like, I just paid everything. They're like, well, that's not my problem because you didn't sign the lease. She did. He felt at that moment just completely fucked over.
Yeah, betrayed.
Yeah. He was like, no, I'm not leaving. I've been sleeping on the streets. I've couch surfed enough. I'm done with that. This is my house too. And I just paid all this money for it. I'm staying. That's when they got into the final fights.
And that was on October 5th, 2006.
Yeah, that was her last day. And then they got into the biggest fight they've ever been in. And she was calling him slurs. She was saying everything that she could. She was screaming on the top of her lungs. People on the street were listening to her.
I bet the landlord was like, fuck, what did I do?
What did I do? There was a lot of people around that were like listening and overhearing. And this fight went on for hours and hours and hours. And it was both of them yelling at each other, but it was a lot of her just saying really mean, hateful things to him and a lot of slurs about him being gay. You can kind of fill in the blanks and use your imagination on how that went down. I guess at some point he wrapped his hands around her neck and he strangled her. And that was it for her. And then he was probably freaking out, like, what do I do? He killed her, but I don't think it was premeditated. It was in the heat of the moment.
Yeah.
Right? And he didn't leave. He grabbed her journal and he started writing in it where she left off. And he very matter-of-factly was like, she did this, she did this, she did that. And then I strangled her and she's dead now. He's like, now I got to figure out what to do with the body.
And he put her in the tub, right?
Yeah, he put her in the bathtub and then he turned the air conditioner way down so it would stay cool so she wouldn't
Smell.
Yeah. He also wrote in the diary that he had sexual relations with her corpse. So there was necrophilia involved within that. Then he was also writing things like, I still love her and things of that nature.
Yeah, he was not in his right mind at all.
Definitely not in his right mind. And there are some people that will speculate because he moved over a voodoo shop that it could have been something to do with that. But honestly, I think that's a stereotype.
Yeah, especially since we went to New Orleans, we met with some shop owners and
Yeah, and they're all about protection and different things like that.
and healing.
Yeah, I really don't think that that had anything to do with it. But I'm not ruling out the fact, because he had PTSD and he was on drugs and alcohol, that a spirit didn't come in and possess him in some kind of a way, or her, or both of them.
Yeah.
So I don't think it had to do with the shop itself, but they were in New Orleans and she's screaming.
Profanities and slurs.
I do believe in possessions.
Yeah.
And I do know that when you have cracks in your mental state, that's when entities and demonic entities can creep in.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that that's not what happened, but I don't think it had anything to do with her being over a voodoo shop for sure. He actually took 3 days off. He was MIA for like 3 days and nobody knew what happened to him. He was just telling people that him and Addie got into a big fight and she left and went back to North Carolina.
That's right. I wanted to add, he also tried to meet up with Lana at this point.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, he tried meeting up with Lana for a drink and she's like, I don't think, because she had wanted to talk to him about signing the divorce papers because she wanted to get remarried and be married to the guy she'd been seeing. He's like, let's go have some drinks. And she's like, that's not appropriate. Absolutely not. And then he tried to say, well, I'll give you some money. The kids need winter coats. I'll give you some money. Da, da, da. The reason why she said no is because he made a comment, maybe I can pay you to give me a strip tease like the old days or something like that. And she was like, fuck you.
Yeah.
And hung up. You're obviously drunk. He was all over the place with everybody, but his cover story for being so fucked up was that Addie had finally left him, which, I mean, technically she kind of did, but what he was spouting to everybody else is that she physically left and went back to home. And there was bystanders outside the apartment that had been interviewed that talked about how the bathroom light had been on overnight and they thought that was weird for some reason. Like it just rubbed them wrong. And it was because he was working on her body.
And when he saw her best friend Caps, he was like, yeah, where's Addie? And he's like, oh, yeah, we got into a big fight and she dipped. She went back to North Carolina. And Cap's first thought was, oh, she's dead.
Yep.
And then he let that override and he was like, no, there's no way.
She was talking about going back to, like, she was threatening that.
Yeah. So he was like, okay, well, maybe she did go back and she has like a little free spirit and, you know, things aren't working out here. She would be the type that would just get up and leave without saying anything to anybody. So he kind of took that as a face value. Zack and Cappy ended up going out the night before Zack took his life. And I'll tell you about that in a minute. But in the meantime, he just spiraled.
Yeah.
He just did drugs and drank and he tried to figure out how to get rid of the body. He cut her hands and feet off and boiled them up on the stove because he didn't want them to smell and he was trying to get rid of them. He decapitated her and put her head on the stove in boiling water.
And cut her hair off.
Yeah. And her torso was in the refrigerator and her legs were in the oven. So he was all over the place with her body parts. And I guess in his mind, he was thinking that he would boil them and cook them and then throw them away like you throw away meat.
Right.
And nobody would be the wiser. And it ended up not working out like that for him. The whole situation of doing that was too much for him. And so he just ended up taking the $1,500 that he had from the money that he had left over after paying for everything. And he just went on a spree of getting fucked up. Drugs, alcohol, strippers, prostitutes. He did that. On his last day, he took Caps with him and they bought a big bag of Coke and they went to a strip club and he was buying Caps lap dances and giving him drugs for free and buying him drinks.
So I called and I left him a message. And an hour later, he called me back and said, tonight we're going out. It's on me. And he got a very big bag of cocaine and then we went to the strip pub and he seemed fine. Back to his jovial persona, bought me lap dances and drinks.
And then in the meantime, every day he's writing in Addie's journal. He's blow by blow, detail by detail. Every day he's writing in the journal saying what he's doing now. He went completely crazy. He was writing in black spray paint all over the walls, all over the bathtub, leaving messages for his wife. He burnt himself with a cigarette 28 times for every year that he was alive. He was going down the list of all the mistakes and all of the things that he did wrong in his life, and writing in the diary and writing it on the walls. The next night is when he decided to go to the rooftop, and he ordered a few drinks, and the bartender called the manager over, and she's like, I don't think he's going to pay for it. She was getting the feeling that he was going to walk out on his tab because his behavior was very erratic. He kept pacing back and forth, and then they look around and he's just gone. And he had jumped to his death with a note in his pocket that said he had to give his life because he took a life.
That was the rooftop bar of the Omni Royale.
Yeah.
That was October 17th of 2006. So he took her life October 5th. This is like weeks later.
12 days later.
Yeah. So 12 days later, October 17th.
Which is really coincidental because we were in New Orleans last year for your birthday.
Yep.
And we were actually there for the anniversary of his death.
So when we went to New Orleans, we did a ghost tour, and that's how we heard about this story. Is it stopped right in front of the hotel. We didn't know the name of the hotel at the time, and she had talked about it happening. And when we went from the 8th to the 12th. When he took Addie's life, that was the 5th. And when he took his life, it was the 17th. So we were right smack dab in the middle of the anniversaries of both of their deaths when we learned about this story. And when we were there, everybody was like, when they say, what's your name? I'm like, Omni. They're like, oh, like the Omni Royale. And I'm like, what is that? And they're like, oh, it's a hotel. And I was like, oh, there's a hotel named after me. Like, that's wild. And then when me and Sahdi were talking, I was like, we should do the Zack and Addie episode. I was like, wouldn't it be wild if the Omni Royal Hotel was the hotel he jumped off of? Googled it. Guess what? That was the hotel he jumped off of. And we were right there on the ghost tour looking at it when it happened. So we were definitely called to do this episode.
Yeah, for sure. From everything that I've heard, there was no indication that he ate her body.
Yeah.
He was boiling it so he could get rid of it.
There was autopsies done.
Yeah, there was no human remains in his stomach at all.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of things going on about it, rumors and stuff going on.
Oh, yeah. It's wild because they were kind of king and queen of New Orleans at the time when Katrina went down. And then when this happened a year later, everybody's like, they're not even from here. They just completely disowned them because it did put a black stain on the city in a way.
It did.
But they both really loved that city. And I don't want to take that away from them.
So yeah, that's pretty much what happened with them. I think I'm ready. We've already premeditated this and we've done a protection ritual because like I talked about in the beginning, I've already had some physical things happen to me. So I want to make sure we're extra grounded, extra protected right now. And I'm going to try to channel the energy of Zack and Addie and see if they'll come through and talk to me and give me some messages. And we're going to do that right now.
Yeah.
Just take this small break to clear my energy and go into a trance-like state so I can channel. And yeah, I'll start with Addie. Okay. All right, so we're back and I did get a glimpse of Addie. As in life, she's a little hothead. She came in, we poured her a shot of rum. She's like, you can keep your fucking shot. I do not want to entertain this at all. She basically said that me and Omni could both fuck right the hell off, was her exact words. She did not want to participate in anything that had to do with this conversation. As she was walking away, she was holding the hand of a taller gentleman who was not facing in my direction. I'm not sure who that was. I can't assume that it was Zack. So I'm going to take, and I have to respect spirit. And if she's not willing to participate and she doesn't want any part of this, then I have to respect that. I was looking forward to talking to her, but her energy is definitely going in another direction. And she's not too happy about us talking about her right now or trying to channel her energy. So I'm going to respect that. I'm going to take another few minute pause and I'm going to try to see if I could tap into the energy of Zack. They are together. But he said, I'll take your shot of alcohol. She's just kind of over there, kind of in the background, just like, she's got an attitude. I don't blame her. But... And it's almost like he's giving me the energy, like he did take the shot over him. And he's kind of like still here. He's like right beside you, actually.
That's
Kind of leaning over the table. Yeah, he's just basically saying he doesn't feel like we did either one of them justice tonight. And she's not happy. And if she's not happy, he's not happy. And he doesn't really have any say to us either.
What could we have done different? We only have what other people have reported on to go off of. So what can we add to do you justice?
He was saying we could have talked more about what they did in the community and how much they helped people and the love that they had and the connection that they had for each other. And he didn't like the way that we talked about her in general. He's like, you guys didn't fucking know her.
No, we didn't. All we can go off is we read.
So yeah, he's very protective over her.
Yeah. So what's something that you would like to share that's more a positive note about her?
He's like, I'm still with her, aren't I?
Yeah.
He said that should say a lot. Enough.
Okay.
He's just kind of saying everybody just kind of says same shit, but nobody tries to really see it from their perspective.
I mean, that's why we're doing the channeling, is because we want to see it from your perspective.
He just turned around and he's like, thanks for the shots, do better.
Damn, okay.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Wow. Do better.
What the fuck? Walk away.
Yeah, they're gone. Okay, so that was unexpected. Yeah.
I couldn't think of anything else to ask him because I would love to hear more of their side of things, but they're just basically like, everyone's going to think what they want to think.
Yeah. I was hoping for more depth and communication between the two of them. I was not expecting them to come through together.
I know, we were specifically trying to do it separately.
Yeah, I was trying to keep it separate because she is the victim. And that just took me completely by surprise.
Yeah.
Just with the results of that. She came through very hot-headed, very upset.
And then he like calmed her down and was like, I got this.
Yeah. He's like, I'll get the shots. And I just don't feel like even in the afterlife, they feel like their spirit is being represented the way that they want it to be. They both showed me that they weren't too happy with that because we were just going off the information that we have gained and researched.
Yeah.
And so that's the story that we told today. And I don't think that they resonated with it as much.
Which is fair. You can't be 100% on all the time. We are human. That is the point of always learning. So we're going to take this into our next true crime crossover when it comes to us. And yeah, their message was that they had an amazing love and that they felt like they really cared about their community, which I can reflect on and be like, yeah, they were very in love with this city. And we did touch on that a little bit about how in love they were with New Orleans. So I can see that resonating 100%.
They feel that people gloss over the really important things. There was very little information about Addie.
Yeah.
Except for the fact that she was an artist and she was this and that. Nobody really goes into the detail about what was her art.
Yeah.
You know, what did it look like? Show pictures of things that she painted and things like that. And so I think that's where they were both coming from with that. It's because we took it from the mainstream instead of what they would hoped for, is that someone would go deeper.
Yeah.
And really get into who they truly were at the core of their beings.
Yeah.
And represent them in that way.
We were talking before this how it was hard to find any information on Addie before New Orleans.
Yeah, it was really difficult.
Yeah.
And I didn't see anything about her art or any of the, costumes that she created or any of the things that she did. But this is humbling to me.
Yeah.
It wasn't exactly what I expected, but you never know when you talk to the spirit world. It's like talking to an actual person. And sometimes they're a little different than they were when they were here because they're in a higher or lower dimension.
Yeah.
They basically came through hand in hand, sticking up for each other. They chose not to really talk to us and give us very much information because they didn't think that we, I guess, deserved it.
Which is fair. They weren't really happy with the way anybody's represented them.
Yeah, it wasn't just directly at us. It was just, people see what they want to see and they report what they want to report. But you didn't really know us.
Yeah.
So you can't speculate.
Before we wrap this up, I did want to add a little disclaimer in there. We are doing our first time ever Tuesday tea time follow-up. And we are going to go over what things happened after we recorded this episode, along with a little bit more in detail of who Zack and Addie were. If you're listening right now, make sure that you subscribe or go look up the next tea time, which is Tuesday tea time number 11, and it'll be called Zack and Addie follow-up. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and you stay tuned in because it's a good one. All right, I guess that's the end of the episode. And as always, guys, remember to keep your minds open.
Namaste.